Hi everyone, and welcome to the TARGETjobs Virtual Careers Fair, and welcome to Iona Bain, who's joining us for this session. So I'm just going to introduce Iona Bain to those who aren't familiar with her. Bear with me, I've written it down, it's very impressive and I want to make sure I got it right. So Iona Bain, Iona Bain is the founder of an award-winning Young Money blog and the UK's go-to voice on millennial money. She is a regular and reassuring presence on TV, radio, podcasts, and social media streams, with recent appearances including a special under-30s edition of Question Time on BBC Breakfast. She is Radio 1's money hacker in residence, regularly broadcasting her financial advice to young people across the country. Iona, what an introduction.
I've got a lot to live up to now, oh dear.
So to kind of kick off then, can you tell us about the economic situation over the last 6 months?
Sure. Well, we're in the middle of the worst recession in modern times. It's the worst recession since records began in the 1950s. And a recession is where GDP, which is gross domestic product, the measure of economic activity, falls over 2 consecutive quarters. That's at least 6 months. And that's what's happened this year. So really, the only economic contraction that we've seen that has been as severe as this one was 300 years ago, when the Great Frost swept most of Europe and caused crops to fail and led to lots of hardship. And in a way, what we've seen in the economy this year is a deep freeze as well, lots of sectors being put on ice for months on end. And the problem with that is that when you come to unthaw businesses, they don't just bounce back straight away. And it takes a while for them to come back to full health, especially if they haven't had that support whilst they've been shut. So naturally, the government has had to step in and support businesses an awful lot over the past 6 months. So we've seen lots of packages from the Treasury. These have included the furlough scheme, where the government pays 80% of people's wages in sectors that were shut down. Also, billions of pounds have been lent out to businesses, large and small, and those loans have been issued through the banks. And there were some problems getting those loans out to businesses initially, but that got resolved as time went on. And there's also been lots of tax holidays and tax referrals for businesses too. So I think the consensus is that actually a lot of those measures have helped to really limit the impact of lockdown on the economy and businesses. Obviously, they haven't completely avoided a recession and widespread problems for businesses, but I think the consensus is that they have worked to some extent in limiting that damage. And there was a hope really that we might have a V-shaped recovery, which is essentially when you have a very steep fall in GDP, it goes right back up again quite quickly and the economy starts to bounce back. And there were signs over the summer, obviously with the Eat Out to Help Out scheme as well, that we were heading for that V-shaped recovery. But now we're at a real crossroads. There are fears about a second wave, whether or not there will need to be new restrictions in order to combat that, how that will affect businesses. And that's why we saw the Chancellor come out with a winter economy plan last week with some new packages for businesses affected by these restrictions, particularly in retail, hospitality and tourism. So we're at a really big crossroads at the moment, and it remains to be seen whether or not we will continue to recover from what has been a really severe recession this year.
So what's the bad news that could affect current students and future graduates?
Well, the bad news is that we will almost certainly have continuing restrictions affecting businesses and the economy, and therefore, as I said just now, that chance of a V-shaped recovery is looking slimmer by the month as each month goes by. And unfortunately, we know that in this kind of scenario, it's young people who are most likely to be affected. So at the height of lockdown in May this year, we know that 1/3 of young people aged between 18 and 25 were furloughed, lost their jobs, lost income, saw their hours reduced, and that is in contrast to 1 in 6 adults over the age of 25. So it's really young people who bear the brunt of the economic damage caused by this. And there's lots of evidence to suggest that those who leave education in a recession are likely to be scarred. And what that means is that their earning prospects will be lower than if they had graduated in normal times. And there was a survey of 179 members of the Institute of Student Employers in May, and they identified a 23% drop in student and graduate recruitment for 2020, which is obviously a huge blow to the class of 2020. We've seen lots of big employers withdraw or defer graduate schemes. And that's unfortunate as well if you are a third-year student at the moment, because that means when you come to graduate next year, there could be lots of people from the class of 2020 coming to take their places, and there may be fewer places for this current year. And the second peak also then risks graduate employers who managed to survive that first lockdown and the economic damage that caused. That might really add to their problems and mean that if they hadn't cut back before now, then they may well cut back on graduate recruitment next year. And remote working is not ideal for young people. We know this, that younger people need to be on site, learning from more experienced people, picking up those little lessons in the corridor, at the coffee machine, in the pub. Those little lessons that young employers pick up go an awful long way. And unfortunately, it's just not the same online. And I've been mentoring a young person in the pensions industry who, really is quite shy and needs to be kind of brought out of herself. And it's just very difficult for her to connect with colleagues and develop her interpersonal skills when she's just communicating with people through Zoom. And the other big disadvantage is that the job protection plan that was announced last week, it's unlikely to save all the jobs that will be lost this winter, because essentially it's forcing employers to decide whether or not they want to bring back casual labour into jobs on a part-time basis. And if you're in the hospitality sector and you have to shut up by 10 o'clock at night, is it really worthwhile bringing people back? So unfortunately, more young people will be made redundant, and we know students are very likely to work in the hospitality, retail, tourism sectors. So yeah, it is going to be a tough winter.
Okay, what's the good news for the class of 2021?
Yes, let's focus on the positives. So the good news is that not all sectors have seen a significant drop in graduate employment. So for instance, the legal sector has only seen a 4% drop in graduate recruitment. And we've seen a lot of big employers like Google manage to shift their graduate schemes online. And those, for the most part, have been quite successful. And I think a lot of employers are really going above and beyond to try and compensate for some of those disadvantages I described with remote working earlier on. A lot of the bigger employers are trying to reach out and make sure their younger workers are okay, checking in with them, hosting online networking and social events so people don't feel quite so isolated and disconnected. So I think employers are trying to make up for this very weird way of doing things. And also, there is a big risk that if you cut back too much on graduate recruitment now, you then face a big talent shortage further down the line when the economy improves again and the business has to scale back up. So a lot of employers realise this, and they realise it's very important to maintain that good graduate pipeline. So that's positive news for students in their final year, and it might help to mitigate some of the competition next year when graduates are going to take up deferred places. And lots of businesses haven't actually gone completely remote yet. We've seen the likes of Schroders say that they're going to now allow people to work from home forever. Twitter, companies like that. But actually, a lot of the companies are moving to what I would call a hybrid model, whereby people will come in some days and work from home on other days, because actually we can't do everything online. We need to be, together for meetings and events. And when that becomes safe and possible to do in the future, then I'm pretty sure businesses will want to bring that back in one way or another. And even, anecdotally, I've been spending time in London this past few weeks. I've been quite surprised how busy it has been during the week. And even though the guidance at the moment is to work from home, it seems like a lot of people are coming into the city because they have been given the choice to do so. And if the workplace is COVID secure and it's possible to social distance and so on, I think businesses will want to try and keep all those options open in the future. And that possibly means a better deal for graduates in the future, because they won't be required to live near to their workplaces, and that means they could probably afford to stay in cheaper areas. So for instance, here in London, lots of people don't want to live south of the river because of the poor transport links, but that might not be such a problem in the future if you're only going into work on a few days a week. You might even be able to live further out, and that's true as well in city centres like Manchester and Birmingham. You may not have to live in the centre where rent is expensive and the cost of living can be high. So that's a silver lining for graduates in the future as well. They might have a cheaper cost of living.
That's great, and it's great to hear that it's not all bad news at the
Definitely
moment.
not. Definitely not. There's a lot to be hopeful about, and also things are in flux, and we just don't know what the future holds at the moment. So I think it's very tempting to look at how things are at the moment and assume it will stay like this forever, but it's a very fast-moving picture.
Absolutely. So what can current students do then to financially prepare themselves for graduation next year?
Well, the first thing I would say is don't worry too much about your student loan, because firstly, you are unlikely to pay off the full student loan over your working lifetime anyway, because students are unfortunately graduating with a very high level of debt. But in a sense, this debt is somewhat abstract. It gets deducted from your salary at a certain rate, and it's only based on what you earn. It's not the case that you will have to pay back the whole student loan over your working life. It's going to get written off after 30 years, and the vast majority of students graduates, I should say, will not pay back that full student loan. So it would be silly if you made an extra special effort in your 20s to pay back your student loan when actually it may not be necessary, and you may never have had to have paid that money back in the future in any case. And it will just be deducted from your salary once you're earning above £26,550. It won't affect your credit score either. So there are lots of reasons why you should probably not worry that much about your student loan and see it more as a graduate tax. What I would concentrate on is preparing for the end of your interest-free overdraft, because when you graduate, you get 3 years of a reduced interest-free overdraft, and it's going to get tapered off as time goes on over those 3 years, so that by year 4, that's it. The interest-free overdraft is over, and you'll be moved on to a standard overdraft. And this year, overdraft charges went up significantly, and you will likely pay about 40%. It really varies on which bank you're with, but the standard overdraft charge now is 40%, which is a lot. It's one of the most expensive forms of borrowing out there. So you really want to try and avoid that and start preparing for a future without an overdraft. And that's very difficult to think about when you're still at university and reliant on that overdraft. But it is about learning to live within your means. And when you do graduate and start earning an income, it should be much easier for you then to use your overdraft as a last resort rather than a first port of call. So the way I would prepare yourself for that future is to just nail down your budgeting style. Hopefully by now you will be in the habit of budgeting, knowing what's coming in and going out, and having a real handle on your finances. But if you're still a bit shaky on budgeting, then now's the time to start thinking about it. And also we've spoken about how the climate out there is really challenging for young people right now, especially those leaving education. But there is an opportunity as well, whereby a lot of temptations out there in the consumer economy just aren't available at the moment. And a lot of the time when I speak to young people, I have to deal with this concept of FOMO, the fear of missing out. Well, the good thing at the moment is that there's nothing really to miss out on, and therefore you can make significant savings because your outgoings are slashed. So really make the most of that. And if you can save money this year, put that into a savings pot with your account, then that would really help you in the future, and you could pay off your overdraft when the interest-free one comes to an end. Try to reject lifestyle creep as well. So when you start a graduate job and you are getting a consistent salary each month, it's very tempting to then spend everything that you earn. And if you have gotten the habit whilst you're a student of living within your means, then try to continue that even when your income goes up as a graduate, because then you're going to create space for savings. And that brings me on to the last tip, which is to really think about your long-term saving and investing goals. When you graduate, you will be automatically enrolled into your workplace pension when you're 22. Don't opt out, because firstly, you get tax relief from the government, and secondly, you get free money from your employer towards your pension, which is a fantastic deal. So really make the most of that. And a lot of graduate employers will offer pretty decent contribution rates too. So if you, the minimum contribution rate for your contribution and your employer's contribution is 8%, but some companies offer more than that, and some employers are a lot more generous. So definitely make the most of that. And if you can put a little bit more in, see if your employer will put a little bit more in. Find out where that pension is invested as well, because it may not be socially responsible, it may not be carbon neutral, and so on. There could be issues there that you wouldn't really be happy about. And you want to make sure your pension is invested in ways that you're comfortable with. And also, if you are thinking about getting on the housing ladder in the future, then I would definitely recommend looking into the lifetime ISA, because you get a bonus of 25% from the government for any money you save into the lifetime ISA up to £4,000. So that's up to £1,000 free from the government towards your first home. So it's a no-brainer if you're absolutely committed to buying your first home in the future.
Fantastic. I think some really great advice there. Thank you. These are obviously quite uncertain and tough times, but what advice would you give for fostering resilience and building skills for future jobs?
Well, firstly, I take my cue from Marilyn Monroe when it comes to how you navigate your 20s. She once said, be a first-rate version of yourself and not a second-rate version of someone else. And I love that, because it really speaks to this temptation to follow other people's playbook for success. And that's what I did in my early 20s. I looked around to other people to tell me what success looked like. And it was only when I started listening to my own instincts and figuring out what success looked like for me that I started becoming a lot happier and a lot more professionally fulfilled as well. So there are lots of people out there who will tell you this is what you need to do in order to be successful and admired and respected and happy. And it might work for them, but it might not work for you. So you have to figure it out yourself. Try to establish a healthy work-life balance, and start doing that now. When I was in my third year at university, I would work very hard because I was really determined to try and get a good degree. I was determined to do well in my exams, but that sometimes meant that I neglected my diet and exercise and friendships, and actually that then made me less productive. And I wasn't able to concentrate and do my best work. So don't neglect the basic stuff. And if you can get in the habit of maintaining that balance, it will really stand you in good stead when you start in the world of work as well, because you'll feel that pressure to stay later than you need to give up your lunch break, to send emails, at midnight, or just generally neglect your personal life and personal needs. But it's really important to try and assert those rights as soon as you start working, and you can practice now by just taking care of yourself and making sure you're eating well, exercising, and seeing people as much as is possible in the current circumstances. And that also means having a solid routine. So at the moment, when we're doing so much more online, it's so tempting to just kind of go, well, I don't really need to get dressed today, I can probably stay in my pajamas. But honestly, you will not do as well as if you just actually get dressed, have a shower. If you're a girl, I put makeup on even when I'm working from home and doing things like this, because it just sets me up and makes me feel confident for the day ahead. And obviously be socially proactive. Try and network with people who are in your field, who are in your year, whereby you can pick up tips and strategies, because you can't do it all on your own. And try to cultivate one thing that is unique to you, that you're passionate about and that you love talking about, you want to master and you want to share with other people. Because then you could volunteer with that hobby, you could set up a site where you could be an influencer on that subject. And it's not about making money from that hobby, but it's about having something in your life that just makes you you. And I think then it has the added bonus in future whereby employers look at you and they see a well-rounded, happy, productive person who will be a good fit for their organization. So I'd say those are my tips for kind of building resilience and building skills for the future.
Fantastic. And I think we've all been guilty of doing some of those things that you mentioned there.
Yeah, me included.
So what would you have told your 20-year-old self then if you were still at university?
Well, I think a lot of older people like to say to younger people, oh, don't worry about the future. Everything will be fine. It'll all work out, better than you expected. And I think that's very easy to say. But of course, you're going to be thinking about the future, possibly even worrying about the future. These are very uncertain, scary times. And it shows that you care. It shows that you're invested in your future. Nobody is going to invest in your future as much as you. So of course you need to be thinking about it and making plans for it and being concerned about it. But what I would say is, don't get too hung up on your identity and how you see yourself today, because that could change so much over the next 5 or 10 years. So for instance, throughout my whole young life, I was a musician. I trained as a classical musician. I worked incredibly hard. I studied music at university. And then when I left, I thought I was going to be either working as a musician or in arts administration, because that's what I thought I was. That's how I saw myself. And it was only when my musical career sort of hit the buffers in my early 20s and I hit rock bottom that I decided I had to do something else with my life. And that's when I started my blog. I moved into financial journalism because I'd done a bit of journalism before then, and I realized I had an aptitude for it and I had a skill. And also, I'm very glad that I trained as a musician. People say to me now, oh my goodness, that's a really weird left field background for what you do. Actually, it helped me understand how to communicate and how to perform, because now I do a lot of broadcast media, I do a lot of public speaking, and I think all of us in our jobs will have to do presentations and speak in front of large groups at one point or another, and having some practice for that is really helpful. But having said that, yeah, I would have been absolutely gobsmacked if you'd have said to me 10 years ago, this is what you'll be doing for a living now. I would have thought, what? That's crazy. But I'm really, really happy that I was open to that route and that I went down that route, because actually this is so much better for me than being a musician and struggling and being unhappy and not really feeling like I was fulfilling my potential. So you are so much more capable than you think you are. And the way you label yourself now, it may not be that helpful. There are so many things you could do. So just be open to all those possibilities. And try not to be an achieverholic. I'm a recovering achieverholic. And I used to think that having certain markers of success in my life meant I was worthwhile. But actually, this last 6 months has shown us that really what matters is the impact that we make on other people, either in our close friends and families or just the wider society. And so I would try to keep that right at the top of your mind as you're going through the process of finding a job, finding a career for you, trying to do something that makes you happy. I would say the way to do that is to think, how can I help other people? How can I have a purpose? And a really great quote that I try to keep in my mind is from Jonathan Swift, who wrote Gulliver's Travels. He said, always have money in your head and not your heart. And that's what I think. If you're pursuing money for its own sake, it will make you miserable and you'll make some really bad decisions. But if you keep money in your head, i.e. you're sensible with your money, so you can go and do things in life that mean something to you, then you will be so much more happier and fulfilled.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think most people kind of go through that point in their life where they really don't know what they want to do or where they're headed. So I think it's really reassuring to hear you say that you've also kind of been through that and kind of done a career change as well.
Yeah.
And so we have had loads of questions coming through. So I think we've got time for a couple more.
Great.
I think there's a couple around sort of bank accounts. So what are the best student and graduate bank accounts for those struggling financially? So with a good overdraft or perks useful for young people right now?
I would say look for the bank account that offers the best terms for interest-free overdrafts. I would say, I don't think any graduate bank accounts offer perks in the way that student bank accounts do. I could be wrong about that. You'll have to check out the market and see what's out there. But I think the priority is to find a graduate bank account. What happens is that you will be automatically put onto your current bank's graduate bank account, which may be just fine, but there could be one out there that has, you know, a better interest-free period. You know, that period typically lasts 3 years, but it may be that it tapers off in a less sudden way. So I would concentrate on that, because I think that's your priority as a graduate, is to just make sure that you're not going to be hit by a really expensive overdraft too soon.
Fantastic. And what are some of the best ways for students to make money from home? So obviously we're all spending quite a lot more time at home at the moment. So what can students do to make money?
It's a good question. So I think that it's worth working with your skill set and trying to think about those things that you are good at and whether you can monetize them. So, you know, that it's not essential. Obviously, you could sell things online, but then I think if you're able to sell your services through sites like TaskRabbit, or to be a tutor, even a remote tutor, that way you might be able to get a slightly better income, because it will be tied to a specific skill that you're able to offer. And I've been selling some clothes through Depop recently, which I've found to be a decent little money spinner, but you do have to go into it with your eyes open, because it's not totally straightforward. You've got to figure out how valuable the clothes you're reselling actually are, and, you know, set the price properly. And also you have to make sure that you notify HMRC, the tax guys, if you are earning more than £1,000 a year from any of these activities, because you've got to declare them. You get a trading allowance, but it's £1,000, and over that you then have to start declaring it. So yeah, I'd say explore a combination of selling your skills online, selling items that you've bought and can resell, and yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Fantastic. And you mentioned earlier kind of, you know, the importance of budgeting, and you know, many students by now thinking about graduating next year would have already kind of got into the habit of budgeting. But do you have any tips for a fresher, or someone who's just going into their first year of university, on how they can start budgeting?
Yes. My first tip is to don't just rely on your student bank account. I'd recommend setting up another bank account and putting any money for your daily spending in that second bank account. And, you know, check out what's out there. There are lots of really good phone first banks, digital banks like Monzo and Starling, that offer really good budgeting tools that will help you see where exactly your money is going. So keep the money for your, you know, you'll receive your student loan into your main student bank account, and then use that bank account to pay your rent, to pay your bills, all the essential stuff, but then move, you know, a certain amount that you know you'll need for other stuff in life into this second bank account. And that way you're not, you know, plundering your student loan really quickly, because I think that's the main problem that freshers have. They get the student loan and they don't know how to pace it, and they don't know how to make it last. I would say try to figure out what your costs will be over the term, and then divide that number into a weekly or daily amount, and then you can stick to a number and not blow your whole student loan within a few days, which is obviously not a good idea.
As tempting as it might be.
Tempting, very, very tempting.
Well, we are almost out of time, but just before we go, Iona, we couldn't let you go without speaking to you about your upcoming book. So did you want to just tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so my book Own It will be out in March, but you can pre-order it now, and it's basically for anybody who is curious about how to own their financial future, and so it's all about long-term saving and investing. And I know a lot of younger people think, oh, I'm not sure if that's really relevant to me, but it is super relevant, because firstly, we're all being automatically enrolled into workplace pensions, but we don't really know what they're invested in. They may be invested in stuff we're not very happy about, like fossil fuels and so on. But also we have an opportunity really to grow our money way more than when we would do if we just saved it in the bank. Obviously, it's a really good idea to have savings for emergencies and short-term goals. But if you want to have a proper nest egg for those things in life that really matter to you, like buying a home, or maybe going self-employed, setting up a business, going traveling in the long term, you want to have other options. And I would say my book is for anyone who is curious about how to grow their money in the long term through investing. So yeah, that'll be out in March, but you can pre-order it now.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like a really great read, and I can't wait to be able to read that.
Great. I'll make sure you get a copy, Justine.
Yes, please. So that is all we've got time for, but can I just say thank you so much, Iona, for taking the time to speak to us today, and thank you to everyone who tuned in.